All right, English teacher friends. So this is a follow-up video to one that I posted just the other day, whereby I use a great children's story called I Want My Hat Back by Jon Klassen to illustrate for students and teachers how to sustain a nice cogent line of reasoning within the body paragraphs. So in my first video, it was geared towards literary analysis, and I used Shirley Jackson's The Lottery since it's like the most commonly taught short story in the American high school curriculum. And I know that I have a lot of AP language friends and English teachers that teach rhetorical analysis, and they said, hey, could you please show us how to do this for the purposes of rhetorical analysis? So I'm going to do it across the expository modes. Use I Want My Hat Back and do a demonstration on how to manipulate my template of the syllogistic method to construct body paragraphs for argument, synthesis, persuasion, research, literary analysis, and rhetorical analysis. So this is video number 2 in the series. And what I'm going to do is focus on a really easy rhetorical analysis. So I'm early in my academic year. I don't follow the College Board's stipulated rollout on classroom with regards to how to unroll material for AP language. I do rhetorical analysis last because I think it's the hardest to do. So I start with argument, FRQ3, because I think it's the easiest. Go to synthesis and then go rhetorical analysis. So for this particular rhetorical analysis, we'll take a look at a letter that Kobe Bryant wrote before his passing called Dear 17-Year-Old Self. So at age 17, he signed his Lakers contract. So he didn't even go to college. He went straight to the NBA. And in his late 30s, he offers this retrospective piece to his 17-year-old self, offering some advice. It's pithy, it's rife with rhetorical appeals, but they're very manifest, they're very easy to identify. So this is a rhetorical piece that I do very early in the academic year to teach the rhetorical appeals. So Kobe Bryant's Dear 17-Year-Old Self, very easy to find online. So what I'm going to do is give you a little overview about I Want My Hat Back by Jon Klassen and talk about how I use children's literature to teach inductive and deductive reasoning, which is essentially, at the heart of my heuristic, at the heart of my template called the syllogistic method. And I'll use the story to help cobble together some body paragraphs for this Kobe Bryant rhetorical analysis. So in terms of the story, if you're not familiar with it, again, it's called I Want My Hat Back. It goes like this. So this little critter goes around and he lost his hat. So he's asking people if they've seen his hat. I do this all the time in my house. Hey, have you seen my car keys? I leave the grocery store and I never remember where I parked my car. So I'm always like, have to send out helicopters to find my car. And so this little guy, he misplaced his hat. So he goes around and he says, have you seen my hat? And the little turtle says, I haven't seen anything all day. I've been trying to climb this rock. Would you like me to lift you on top of it? Yes, please. And it goes like this. Have you seen my hat? I saw a hat once. It was blue and round. My hat doesn't look like that. Thank you anyway. So in the end, the little rabbit has his hat and he locates it. He finds it. In writing, I think students often lose themselves and we grade their papers and we scratch our chin and say, this went in a real wayward direction. This fell off the tracks. And when we say that, we're ultimately saying the line of reasoning was not sustained. There's not a cogent line of reasoning. So what I want to do is go over my template of the syllogistic method and talk about the first premise. So those that are familiar with my work, you hear me say all the time, the first premise is a promise. So you have to remember where you drop your hat, right, when you write. And all your textual support, all your textual analysis, your quotes, your paraphrases need to be germane to where you left your hat. right? And I'll demonstrate that for you. So I've done one, as I said, for The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, and I'll do it for this Kobe Bryant piece. So the immediate question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And you're going to bust out a syllogism as always. So that's the glory of my template, is that it can be used across the expository mode. So in that Shirley Jackson Lottery piece, my students are using the syllogistic method. And now for rhetorical analysis, they're going to use the syllogistic method, and they do it for argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research. It's a uniform approach across the expository modes. So in my classroom, I have a poster that looks like this, and it just kind of delineates the high flyer terms and devices that we see as we read speeches and letters and things of that nature. And when we see something new, we add it to the poster. So this is a little Velcro poster. And at the time of reading this Kobe Bryant piece, my students are familiar with all of these. So what I have them do in their introductions is declare the thesis and find the 3 to 4 most salient terms and or devices to get anchored around the thesis. And there's good news. In my YouTube channel, there's a whole writing workshop on this Kobe Bryant piece. So if you want to do a deep dive into this and use it with your students, I recommend you check out that video, just as there's a writing workshop for The Lottery as well as the I Want My Hat Back piece. So you got a couple of supplementary things. So in terms of constructing the body paragraphs, as I've alluded to, my students are accustomed to using the syllogistic method. And just to give you a cursory overview of what that is, it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. It comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they would throw out these juicy questions like, what is justice? And you might be familiar with Plato's Republic, which is a seminal text in this discipline. And the great philosophical think tankers would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of justice. And Aristotle, much like us composition teachers, was concerned with cogency, which we call line of reasoning. How do you be computative, mathematical, just absolutely pristine and lockstep when you argue? And he studied his best students. He really wanted to know, like, internally, their machinations, their clockwork. What were they doing to structure their arguments to enable them to win debates all the time? And one day he had a eureka moment and he said, I got it. They're arguing syllogistically. And one thing that we have to keep in mind as composition instructors is this: if we are asking our students to write within an expository mode, so literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research, it's all an argument. So on FRQ1 on the Lang exam, the College Board says 3 times, your argument must be central. Well, here's the kicker. I say to all of my students, not just my AP students, if it's expository, your argument must be central. So what happens in rhetorical analysis is this. And I would love to do a webinar and do some workshops on this. If we look at College Board sample papers, most kids only provide a second premise, and that's why it reads so plot heavy. They retell the story of Kobe Bryant's letter to himself as if it's like a Cliff Note summation. And therefore, they're not even meeting the demands of the assignment. It's plot analysis, not rhetorical analysis. So we got to make sure that we ensure the centrality of the argument. Well, how are we going to do that? How do we do that? Well, the first premise in rhetorical analysis is the same as the first premise in literary analysis. But the exception is that you're going to use rhetorical terms and devices instead of literary terms and devices. So it's an argument containing the terms and the devices. This always is going to be 3 sentences long. I like it when my students take 3 sentences for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of students, the emerging, struggling writer, we'll have one paragraph pathos, one paragraph tone, one paragraph syntax, one paragraph ethos, one paragraph logos, and go very lockstep, kind of clobber you over the head with these 4-sentence body paragraphs, doing one term at a time. Not going to get the sophistication point that way, and most likely not going to qualify the exam. It's just very elementary writing. So by taking 3 sentences, students can begin to link terms and devices together. So like, for example, how does a syntactical manipulation yield a tone shift, right? So analyze the tone and the syntax at the same time. And then how does that intersect with the logos? And even therefore, from there, the ethos, right? Combine things together. So we're going to talk about multitasking the first premise, getting a few terms and devices in there. Because my guys only write 4 paragraphs: intro, 2 bodies, conclusion, on all FRQs. The second premise is the textual support. You have the text in front of you, so you got to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. You don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other, otherwise it's out of kilter and lacks balance. So teeter-totter balance that. The conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. So again, the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay, is the textual analysis. And everything links back, echoes back to the thesis, the prompt, but you got to kind of shake hands with that first premise. That first premise is a promise. So I promised you that I would talk about tone, syntax, and ethos. So in the end, you got to make sure you're talking about tone, ethos, syntax, right? And link it all up. Students ask good questions, and they often say to me, how many sentences is a syllogistic body paragraph? Since we're using templates, you must have a magic number. And I say, by gosh, I do. Those 4-sentence, 5-sentence baggers that students so typically write don't have nearly enough support or analysis in them to really substantiate a claim and flesh out an argument. So I say shoot for 10 sentences, hard cap at 12. Right, for rhetorical analysis, all the expository modes, 10 to 12 sentences. So let's take a look at my first 3 sentences here where I drop the terms and devices. Students are full of good questions, and they often ask, where do I begin my body paragraph, my first body paragraph? And I say, start right where Kobe starts. So go methodically through it. So you'll see my students begin their body paragraphs with clauses like right from the onset. It cues your reader into knowing that you're supremely organized, that you have a sequence, you have a chronology. You're going to methodically work through this piece, cross-weave when necessary. So what's the first thing that Kobe does, right? And just kind of get a couple of terms, link some things together in here. So right from the onset, Kobe draws a stark difference at the denotative level between the act of giving versus investing. So all right, we got diction, the difference between giving and investing. Bold capping the words and using white space dramatically, he carefully delineates the semantic schism between the 2 philosophical approaches. So you're kind of getting into logos there. Logos is implied, and you got syntax, right? So you got diction, syntax, logo so far. Bolstering his tone, all right? So now we got tone. With the singular focus on the you pronoun, Kobe falls short of reprimanding himself for his kind gestures gone awry. So if we break this down into a promise, we've said, dear reader, we're going to talk about the denotative difference between giving and investing. We're going to analyze the syntax that ties in with that. By extension, we're going to get into the logos, and then by extension, we're going to get into the tone. Since you talked about diction first and the denotative level of things, the very first thing you have to talk about is diction and that denotation. So second premise begins 4th sentence. Get quoting what you dropped right here. What I'm going to do in a second after I show you the whole paragraph is demonstrate for you how I want my hat back can be used to really explain this and delineate for students exactly how to do this on a visual level, because just talking about it in the ether can be very confusing, and the bus is going to leave the station with a lot of kids not on it. So I'm just going to go through it this way first in kind of a pedantic manner, if you will, and then I'm going to show you the hat trick. So immediately, he isolates the contrast between invest and give. So why are these quotes important, and why are these the best quotes? Because you dropped it here. So the hat would go here, right? And you have to remember to carry your hat with you. Remember to leave with your hat. Standing alone as separate paragraphs and assertive independent clauses, so we're getting into the syntax because that's what was dropped second. He draws the logical difference between the two terms by capitalizing each letter. By saying logical difference, we're also into the logos, which we have here. Bryant explains that most people with kind and compassionate hearts think that purely giving material things to siblings and friends may appear to be the right decision, but in doing so, one subtracts the most precious gift of all, independence and growth. So this is really cool here. Let's talk about these quote transitions, because these are silky smooth. I have a template for that. I call it the 5-word rule. If students place a minimum, so not exactly, but a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keep the quote small, it should sound conversational. Bracket when needed. This is super sophisticated because this kid quoted twice in one line. I don't see that very often when I read College Board sample papers. So when we're talking about that elusive sophistication point, I Bob Ross this for my students. Use the text for your argument, right? Don't get into regurgitative statements about what Kobe Bryant is doing. It's analysis. So we quote, analyze. In many ways, Kobe's logic is akin to the give a man a fish adage. In a proverbial sense, he was giving his friends and family fish instead of teaching them how to fish. The big thing, however, is that Kobe learned that his intentions were not pure. Using anaphora, right? So get back to the syntax. He points the finger at himself and says, you feel good. It made you happy. And that was extremely selfish of you. With the benefit of hindsight, Kobe realizes that his ego was a main motivator in why his decisions backfired. His intentions were good, but they were not pure. Instead of helping his friends and family realize their own dreams and find their true purpose, he conversely struggled to wean them off the addiction that he facilitated. Now, we quote, analyze it. Addiction is such a loaded word, but it is what Kobe uses to describe the conditions he created, conditions that led to anger, resentment, and jealousy from everybody involved, including himself. Let's go back. Have we kept our promise here? Because that's a lot of support. We're approaching 12 sentences. Did we talk about that semantic denotative shift between giving versus investing? Yes, we did. Did we cover syntax? Yup. We got a good concentration on the logos, and we got the tone. So we carried our hat with us. We left the room with our hat on, and I'll demonstrate this in just a second. In the end, echo, link, promise. Throw it all back. A 17-year-old being given the keys to the kingdom is rare. But Kobe knows that his gifts are being rewarded with the undertaking of huge responsibilities. Given it to do over, the giving would be eclipsed by the investing. And that took 12 sentences. So let's say, you don't get it. Kids don't get it. It's tough. It's very theoretical. It's very pie in the sky. Let's delineate everything for us with this hat trick, right? Using I want my hat back. In the first premise, if we're multitasking, we have a few hats that we have to remember to take with us as we leave the first premise. So let's delineate this with a few hats. What are we promising? What do we have to remember to take with us as we leave the room of the first premise? So these are the first 3 sentences, the first premise. So look what's promised here. Right from the onset, Kobe draws a stark difference at the denotative level between the act of giving versus investing. So we have to talk about denotative levels. So in the second premise, we have to have a white and red hat. We need a quote, a paraphrase, something to demonstrate that, to illustrate it. Bold capping the words and using white space dramatically, he carefully delineates the semantic schism between the two philosophical approaches. Blue hat is going to be an analysis of the syntax. Bolstering his tone with singular focus on the you pronoun. Cowboy hat is going to be tone, right? Or syntax, sorry, tone and syntax. Kobe falls short of reprimanding himself for his kind gestures gone awry. So we're 3 sentences in, and we have 3 promises that we've made. Now you have to go in order. White, red hat, get a quote, get a paraphrase. Blue hat, quote, paraphrase. Cowboy hat, quote, paraphrase. 4th sentence, I tell my students, get quoting and paraphrasing. So look how I'm going to remember to take my hat with me. Immediately, he isolates the contrast between invest and give, standing alone as separate paragraphs and assertive independent clauses. He draws the logical difference between the two terms by capitalizing each letter. Bryant explains that most people with kind and compassionate hearts think that purely giving material things to siblings and friends may appear to be the right decision, but in doing so, one subtracts the most precious gift of all, independence and growth, right? So you can see here this blue hat is lurking. Why? Because we got to get into the syntax, which we kind of already are. Have we done an analysis at the denotative level between giving and investing? Yes. So we remembered to take our hat into the room of the second premise. Now we got to do the syntax, all right? So let's see here. In many ways, Kobe's logic is akin to the give a man a fish adage. In a proverbial sense, he was giving his friends and family fish instead of teaching them how to fish. The big thing, however, is that Kobe learned that his intentions were not pure. Using an aphora, so just taking a syntactical feature here, right? Because we promised syntax, so let's get it. He points the finger at himself and says, you feel good. It made you happy, and that was extremely selfish of you. All right, so you can't go on and on and on about it. We got it. We're good. We still have to get back to this tone, right? And by extension, a little bit further into the logos. With the benefit of hindsight, Kobe realizes that his ego was a main motivator in why his decisions backfired. His intentions were good, but they were not pure. Instead of helping his friends and family realize their own dreams and find their true purpose, he conversely struggled to wean them off the addiction that he facilitated, right? So you don't need to always explicitly state your term. This is implied, but it's connecting back to the cowboy hat, right? Addiction is such a loaded word, but it is what Kobe uses to describe the conditions he created. Conditions that led to anger, resentment, and jealousy from everybody involved, including himself. All right, so we got textual support and textual analysis for white and red cap. We have textual support and textual analysis for blue cap. We have textual support and textual analysis for cowboy hat. Notice we went in that order. So however you drop it is the order in which it needs to be delivered in the second premise. The conclusion, wrap it all up. Go back to the thesis, go back to the prompt, go back to the first premise. A 17-year-old being given the keys to the kingdom is rare, but Kobe knows that his gifts are being rewarded with the undertaking of huge responsibilities. Given it to do over, the giving would be eclipsed by the investing. And my students always wrap up their body paragraphs in like 2 sentences. Be quick about it. Don't need to bloviate and go on and on and on. Just a quick wrap up. Sink it all back. So whatever your hat was for the thesis and the prompt, you got to put it at the end too. It all goes back. So I want my hat back. So don't leave your hat, right? Don't run away from your hat and having to go looking for it, getting lost and wayward within the spaces of your body paragraphs. So hopefully you found this to be useful. If you got questions, feel free. You can email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. If you want the slides, hit me up at that email address and I'll pass them your way. And then teachers often like this idea of Bob Rossing instruction and trying their own hand at writing models and exemplars, but it's terrifying. A lot of teachers I've noticed in my line of business with National Writing Project, a lot of teachers are mortified at the idea of showing students their writing. If you want me to look it over or help you out, happy to do that. And speaking of those NWP courses, I'm teamed up with them. They're teamed up with me, and we're offering my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. And here's what it is in a brief synopsis here. So we meet Sunday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 5 consecutive weeks. And we do all sorts of things together. We get a full immersion experience into my templates, and we look at them across the expository modes. Do deep dive into AP Lang, AP Lit, my Plato's Plato discussion modality, my alternative grading methods, my line of reasoning, my word study academy, my nuance academy. We do that all in 5 weeks. So what National Writing Project is doing, which is kind of cool, is they're giving it a 10-hour completion badge for professional development purposes. That's pretty cool. So for 5 hours of your time, you get 10 hours of PD. And there's not a lot of homework involved in it. 15 minutes, to prepare and do reflections and things of that nature. We're also cobbling together a self-paced course for people that can't free up 5 hours of their lives. And we're going to do monthly webinars and in-services for professional development. So in November, I'm doing my alternative grading methods. And in December, I'm doing a segment on line of reasoning where I bring in a bunch of children's literature and show how we can teach line of reasoning across the expository modes. So hopefully that all is good, all is well. And for now, be happy, happy teaching, happy writing.